Hello and a warm welcome to Federal special program Capital Beat. Prime Minister's interview to ANI is being discussed a lot. He spoke on a whole lot of issues, but today I'm going to focus only on the electoral bonds, what exactly he has said. So he said that it was bringing in the electoral bonds was a small effort so that the funding to the parties becomes clear and corruption free. He said that because of the electoral bonds, we are able to trace which company has given money, how did they give money, where did they give money. But now we have pushed the country towards black money. So he's basically justifying that the electoral bonds were correct. The effort which was put in by the BJP in bringing the electoral bonds was right. So what does it mean? Does that mean that the Supreme Court, which recently on 15th of February said that electoral bonds are unconstitutional and they are a violation of the freedom of expression, right to freedom, right to information? So is Prime Minister trying to say that the decision by the Supreme Court or the verdict of the Supreme Court is wrong? Because repeatedly, not only in the ANI interview, but also before this, when he gave an interview to the Tanti TV, he said the same thing, that the people who are opposing the electoral bonds will have to regret. And if honestly they think, they will regret. So what does this statement really mean? He's trying to justify all of this. Joining me now is the renowned transparency activist Anjali Bharadwaj, who was also part of the electoral bonds case. She had filed a petition. Thank you so much, Anjali, for joining. And I would really want to understand from you the statement which has been made by the Prime Minister on electoral bonds. Now, is he justifying or is he saying that the verdict by the Supreme Court is not right? What does that mean?
Yes, so let me just explain, Neelu, that there are 2 or 3 things that he has talked about, the Prime Minister in his interview. And like you said, this is not the first interview. He has given a similar interview in the past as well. Now, he is saying that they were concerned, his government was concerned about cash being used to give to political parties because large donors do not wish to be known who they are funding, because they're worried that the party in power, the government of the day, which forms the government of the day, controls bodies like the ED, CBI, etc., and they might get angry and go after donors who are giving to opposition parties. And therefore, they prefer to give by cash rather than through banking channels. And therefore, they brought in this completely non-transparent, anonymous scheme to make sure that people are incentivized to give through the banking channel. Now, first of all, there is a basic problem in what the Prime Minister is claiming, because let us understand that the designated bank for selling and accepting electoral bonds was the SBI, the State Bank of India, which is a government-controlled bank. So from the very beginning, it was very clear that the SBI would know who is funding money and to which political party through electoral bonds, because they would have the KYC of the donor. And since SBI has the information, it was very clear from the beginning that the ruling party at the center, which controls the SBI, would also have that information. So the premise on which these bonds were brought, that they will be completely anonymous, nobody will know, was to begin with not there in the scheme, because the SBI was the dealing bank. And now when the data has come out, it is very clear that the bonds were being tracked. The unique alphanumeric number on each bond was being recorded both on the purchaser side and the redeemer side, which means that it was possible for the SBI and therefore possible for the government to know who was funding which political party. And therefore, the worry that the Prime Minister claims that they were trying to address was clearly not addressed, because anyone who was donating to the opposition knew that the ruling party at the center would know who they are donating to and could easily be vindictive towards them. Now, that was the first thing which also came out in the Supreme Court hearing. The second thing which the Prime Minister is claiming is that all of this was done to reduce black money. In fact, he goes on to say that his government is committed to reducing black money and therefore even brought in demonetization. And electoral bonds were also brought in to reduce cash and black money in the system. Now, one can understand that perhaps there was a lack of understanding on the part of the Prime Minister and his government when they were bringing in the electoral bond scheme, and they brought it with good intentions. But there is a problem. The RBI and the ECI, the Election Commission, both wrote to the government before the electoral bond scheme was brought in, saying and raising this big danger flag that don't bring in the electoral bond scheme. This will encourage money laundering. This will increase black money in the system, because the electoral bond scheme, the way it has been framed, the bonds can be traded for a consideration. What does that mean? If I go to the bank, to the SBI, and through banking channels, I give my KYC and buy electoral bonds, but somebody else has cash and they want to buy those electoral bonds from me, they can do that. These bonds are actually tradable. Although they are prohibited from trading, there is no safeguard against trading. So I can just take the cash and give the electoral bonds that I bought through the banking channel to those people, and they can be the real donors to the political parties. Again, this was something that was clearly discussed and brought out in the Supreme Court hearing. Let us not forget that a constitution bench of the Supreme Court of India actually heard each of these points in great detail. What is really surprising is that either the Prime Minister has not read the judgment and followed the hearing of the Constitution bench, or he is willfully choosing to ignore the fact that each of the points that he is making today, that we brought this to reduce cash, we brought this to reduce black money, we brought this to introduce anonymity, and so on. All of these were examined by the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court was not convinced. The Supreme Court still said that these bonds are unconstitutional, they should be banned. So now either the Prime Minister, when he repeatedly says that people will regret this, is assuming that the Supreme Court did not understand anything that was happening and has passed an order, has passed a judgment called something unconstitutional. See, this is a very high threshold. The court is saying that this scheme violated Article 19, 1A of the Constitution. It violated people's right to know, people's free speech and expression, and has banned this scheme. It's very, very unfortunate that the Prime Minister continues to defend a scheme which has been clearly shown to be unconstitutional by the courts. And this is a scheme which repeatedly the RBI, the ECI, and now the Supreme Court have said will increase corruption, will increase black money. It's really unfortunate that the Prime Minister is still going on defending this scheme.
But Anjali, what I don't understand is that why has Prime Minister chosen to ignore the Supreme Court verdict on the electoral bonds? I mean, what is the idea behind? And whatever little interviews we have seen in the past, whether it was to Tanti TV or it was to ANI yesterday, he repeatedly says the same thing. And as what you said, that he's telling the people that, you know, those who are opposing the electoral bonds will regret. So does he mean that Supreme Court will regret? Does he mean that the opposition will regret? Does he mean that activists like you who have been raising this issue continuously for years, are you people going to regret? Whom does he point the fingers at, according to you?
Well, I think he has made it very clear repeatedly that everyone who has opposed the electoral bond scheme, which includes citizens, which includes opposition parties, and of course the Supreme Court of India, he is repeatedly saying that everyone will regret their decision. Now, I think that this, like I said, either shows his ignorance of the fact that the electoral bond scheme was a very dangerous instrument. It has been stated clearly by the Supreme Court that it is unconstitutional. The court, the citizens, everyone went into great details as to why each of the points that the Prime Minister is saying were important in the scheme were in fact wrong. And therefore, I think either it is pure ignorance or he is trying to still defend instead of coming clean and saying, look, we brought in this scheme. It has been shown to be very dangerous because it is perhaps now looking like, now the data is out, it is looking like it might be the biggest scandal, the biggest scam, corruption scam the country has known still date. So now with something like this, for him to say that people will regret, I think that it sends out a very wrong signal. This is the time when the Prime Minister should be saying that, look, we brought in this scheme. Clearly, it was a very, very wrong scheme, and we've stopped it now. And if there was anything that was wrong that was being done, we want an investigation into it, and we want people who were doing wrong to be brought to book. That is what he should be saying. And right now, he's actually just saying that people will regret it.
But Anjali, during the course of the interview, he also says that when we were discussing electoral bonds in Parliament, opposition parties also had supported, and we were not saying that it is a foolproof method, for funding the parties. And we could have made improvements. He also hints at that. Now, does it mean that if Modi returns to power, there is a possibility that he might again bring in the electoral bonds, despite Supreme Court saying that the scheme is unconstitutional? Now, is the Prime Minister trying to create a narrative where he prepares a ground for bringing in the electoral bonds when his government returns to power?
So, Neelu, first of all, let me clarify that before bringing in the electoral bond scheme, 4 laws were amended in Parliament. Now, the Prime Minister is saying that, there was a lot of support for the electoral bonds in Parliament, etc. But these laws were amended through the Finance Act, which means that where the BJP at that time did not have a majority, which was the Rajya Sabha, this was not even debated. So I think that the very act of bringing in these amendments to bring the electoral bond scheme was very, very faulty. It prevented any proper discussion or debate on the issue in Parliament, which was so necessary at that time. And at this stage, to say that everybody was in favor is, I think, very misleading. Now, the second thing which you are saying, that is he trying to build a narrative to bring something like an electoral bond scheme back? Look, he cannot bring this scheme back in the manner in which it was, because the Supreme Court has clearly declared it unconstitutional. Now, either the Prime Minister is, if it has to be brought back, then either the constitution has to be changed. Otherwise, there is no way to bring back a scheme like the electoral bond scheme, which has been declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. I think it would be a great, great folly on the part of any government now to try and bring in this scheme again. But yes, I think what the Prime Minister is continuing to do is to say that this is a very regressive step, and that black money will again prosper in political party funding. Cash will again be used. The reality is that cash was never stopped. All that was done was there was a cap of 2,000 rupees that was put on cash. Now, here we need to recognize that even before, cash used to be taken by political parties before electoral bonds came. And basically, because the IT Act and the RPA, the Representation of People's Act, said that any political party which takes money less than 20,000 or 10,000 rupees does not have to declare the source of income, there was creative accounting being done. They would just write that we've taken 9,900 rupees worth of cash, when they were actually taking hundreds of crores of rupees in cash from any company. What has happened? What has changed now after the electoral bond scheme came also? Even then, they could just say, we've taken money of 1990 rupees, and just keep showing those very large sums of cash that were coming in as smaller donations. So the cash never stopped coming in. The court also asked this question to the Solicitor General. And when the Solicitor General in court tried to say that this has reduced cash, the court said, have you banned cash being taken by political parties? And the Solicitor General had to say, no, cash is still being taken by political parties. So cash was continuing. It will continue. And now what we really need, and if the Prime Minister is really interested in reform, in genuine reform, what he should be saying is that I will make sure that not a single penny can be taken by a political party anonymously. That is the reform that was required. He should have said that I will make sure that my party, which is the BJP, and if he wants to say that I will bring in a law which says all parties will comply with the Right to Information Act. He doesn't even have to bring in a law, actually, Nilu. The law exists. The Central Information Commission has told the BJP and the other parties that you must be transparent under the RTI Act. Somebody needs to ask the Prime Minister, why is he not submitting that the BJP will come under the RTI law? Now, unfortunately, we are seeing that when these interviews are happening, nobody is asking real questions to the Prime Minister. If somebody who's interviewing him were to ask him that what is the BJP trying to hide? What are other political parties trying to hide by not coming under the RTI law? These are the real reforms that are needed, not electoral bonds that make everything that comes through them anonymous. That is a regressive step.
Right. Anjali, another point which PM made, and he was trying to, correlate things and then raise questions on the correlation, saying that 3,000 donors, out of which 26 were investigated, 14 were raided. Now, how can people correlate all this? And he was saying that 37% only has been donated to BJP and 63% has gone to the opposition parties. Now, by making a statement like this, what is Prime Minister really trying to indicate, according to you?
Look, Nilu, what has come out through the electoral bonds data is very damning. It is really showing that there was a very, very big scam that was happening through electoral bonds. Now, I feel that the kind of statements that the Prime Minister is making, he is simply trying to justify things. He is trying to really whitewash things, which is not becoming of the Prime Minister of the country. His statement basically was that there is a concern that there were many companies who were being raided by ED, CBI, and IT department. And then during that time, they started giving money through electoral bonds to the BJP. And this is a very important concern. These agencies are our premier investigating agencies of our body. They are the equivalent of the FBI in India. Now, these agencies, if it looks like they were being used for extortion by the ruling party at the center, I think this should send chills down any citizen who is looking at this data. Now, the Prime Minister is saying that, yes, we did take money from those companies, but we took 37% only, not 63%. The other 63% from these companies went to some other political party. Now, it very well might be that those companies...
Actually, does that mean that the Prime Minister, in a way, is saying that, okay, BJP is only 37% corrupt, but the opposition is 63% corrupt?
No, Nilu, let me clarify what the problem there is. The problem there is that the 63% will have to be investigated. It might have been gone for quid pro quo to some other political party. But this 37% that the ruling party at the center, which controls the CBI, ED, and IT department, were taking, this is what is of concern, because the other political parties are not in power at the center. They cannot influence ED, CBI, and IT department. That can only be done by the ruling party because it is forming the government at the center. So this 37% is what needs to be investigated. The big question now is that the Supreme Court needs to set up an independent investigation so that one can actually see why the BJP was being given money by these companies. Was it because there was extortion? Was it because this was money so that the ED, CBI, and IT could be told by the government that don't go after these companies? So the BJP cannot equate itself today to any other political party. They are the ones who are in power at the center. And when people are raising questions, they cannot get away by saying, the Prime Minister cannot get away today by saying that, look, we took 1% of it, 37%, the others took some other percentage. Doesn't matter. The BJP took money. Why did the BJP take money from these companies when they were being raided by? Why was the BJP being given this money? That is a matter of investigation. And this actually, is a play of numbers and words, where the Prime Minister is trying to say that, look, everyone is corrupt. And I'm sorry, Neelu, for it's a huge step down for the Prime Minister, who in 2014 came to power, his party came to power on the plank of anti-corruption, calling everyone else corrupt, saying we will create a corruption-free India. For him today to be sitting there and saying, look, we only took nearly 40%, others took 60%. So how this, two wrongs in any case don't make a right. And also, this is misleading because the BJP is the party in power at the center, not any other party.
Actually, you were talking about an independent probe. Now, see the kind of pressure which is being put on the Supreme Court. First, there were 650 lawyers who wrote a letter to the Chief Justice of India. Then yesterday, we saw about 21 retired judges who wrote a letter to the Chief Justice of India on a whole lot of issues, which obviously it's clear for anyone to understand that it's because of the electoral bonds verdict, it's because of Arvind Kejriwal's arrest, and this kind of a pressure when it is being put on the Supreme Court. Do you think that this independent probe you're talking about will actually see the light of the day?
I think that the Supreme Court of India is a very strong institution. They have given a seminal judgment in the electoral bonds case. Of course, this judgment seems to have rattled many people, and they have been repeatedly questioning the judgment. They have been repeatedly trying to build a narrative about the judgment. But I think that there is very, very clear trends that are emerging of potential quid pro quo, of kickbacks, of corruption, bribery that are coming out in the electoral bonds data. I would be shocked if the Supreme Court can look at all of that data and say that it doesn't require a probe. Now, once it is established that it requires an investigation, who will investigate? When agencies, investigating bodies like ED, CBI are already embroiled in this whole scam, how can they be asked to investigate? It is very commonsensical that it will have to be an independent investigation. It cannot be something that is influenced in any way by the government, and therefore it has to be a court-monitored investigation. An SIT will have to be set up. We will, of course, see what the court says, and the court in its wisdom will pass a judgment when this issue comes up before it. But I think that there is a very clear and very strong case made out for a court-monitored probe into the electoral bond scam.
One last bit before I wind up the interview, that what happens if the court takes time, to initiate this independent probe? Because you were one of the petitioners as well. So will you be approaching the court on this particular thing for an independent probe? How is it going to happen? Because right now, nothing much is being heard from the court's end on the electoral bonds. So except now that PM is giving interviews and justifying the electoral bonds in all possible ways. So what would people like you, who were the petitioners as well, now how would you approach the court? Are you going to file a case again, or how is it really going to happen so that this court monitored probe takes place?
If the court has to be approached, it will have to be done by concerned citizens, by organizations that want to take this issue up. The petition will have to be filed in the Supreme Court. Let me say here that unfortunately, all of these issues take time. Both the filing of a petition like this would be time consuming, and certainly once it is filed, the court will do a hearing. The court will then set up an SIT if it agrees to do so, and the SIT will then take time in investigating. So all of this is time consuming. I think, there are no shortcuts, unfortunately, in keeping democracy safe. But yes, there are certainly discussions, there are certainly people who are interested in taking the matter to the Supreme Court. I will not be surprised if a petition is filed in the Supreme Court fairly soon to demand a court-monitored probe. It will then, of course, be up to the Supreme Court, and we can only hope that the court doesn't take 6 years, 7 years this time, and actually gives it a speedy hearing and ensures that there is justice and the guilty are brought to book. Because what we are talking about here, Neelu, is the basic integrity of our democracy, where the level playing field has been destroyed through electoral bonds. We are going into election after election with political parties, especially the BJP, which has been getting the lion's share of the electoral bonds, amassing a great deal of wealth using these electoral bonds. And now we can see clearly how companies which gave money to ruling parties then got contracts. Contracts worth lakhs of crores of rupees have been given in very close proximity to these companies after they gave electoral bonds or before they gave electoral bonds. So all of this is now in the public domain. It needs, however, a proper investigation so that those who were doing the wrong thing can be brought to book. I believe that all this money should be confiscated, because if shell companies were involved, which it is looking like they were from the data, if black money was being laundered, which again it is appearing from the data and the figures that are there, if kickbacks were being given, all this is proceeds of crime. No political party, if it is shown that these were all proceeds of crime, they should not be allowed to use this money. So I think that there is much for the Supreme Court to consider.
Thank you so much, Anjali. It was wonderful having you on the program, and we'll have to wait and watch how the Supreme Court moves, how the petitions come up. But yes, lots of questions still are waiting for the answers. Thank you very much, Anjali. And one appeal to the viewers who are watching this interview: subscribe to our channel, send us your feedback, and stay tuned to the Federal. Thank you.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.